So the GPU landscape seems to be changing pretty fast. A lot of 5090s in stock. You may not even care about the 5090. It may just be way too expensive for you at this point, and I wouldn't blame you. But the fact that it's in stock at over $3,000, and I referenced a few places. Newegg has it in stock, so that's pretty much countrywide. They have some like MSI models, and they're all. You could say the average price is around 3,000. In my local micro center, including all the ones not too far away. They all have over 20 in stock. I think I counted 24 in my local micro center. So like the funniest one is going to be that PNY, which is like 34.99 or something crazy like that. So like they really like jack the price up a significant amount. I mean, let's remember these GPUs started at 1999 MSRP. Some of them are supposed to have base models. It's not just the Founders Edition. Even if the Founders Edition is technically still 1999, try to find one. You're not going to find it unless you're super lucky with like a Best Buy drop or one of those like, the Nvidia Priority Access. And if you want to buy one on the secondhand market, you're going to be paying $3,000 plus. So, it's basically the same price as all the other GPUs. It's just more for like the optics or for the media to say that, NVIDIA probably couldn't release a $3,000 5090 because when they compare it to the 4090. And now let's hear a word from our sponsor, VIP-CDKdeals.com, a Windows Pro CD key. Add to cart, you put in code CC20. This will also work on Windows 11. You want to go into your settings in Windows, change and adjust your CD key, click activate, and now let's go back to the video. Don't get me wrong, the 5090 is better than the 4090. On average, 20 to 30% better. 32 gigabytes of VRAM, but it's not twice as expensive type of better. Remember the 4090 was 1599. That's pretty close to what I got mine for when a Micro Center released them. 150 in stock with the 4090. When the 5090 came out, 4 in stock on launch day. Look at that big difference. So we're not talking about huge demand. We're talking about just very low numbers. So like what's been happening with these 5090s? It's one thing for them to actually be in stock at over $3,000, but they've been at that price or close to it. They started going up basically as soon as they came out. The $2,000 level pricing never really lasted very long. So they've been at that level. But before they would sell out, like people would literally camp on a normal weekday at Micro Center just for the chance that a shipment may be coming in. Like they didn't know it was going to come in. It was just a regular, whatever, Tuesday or Wednesday. But, when I go to Micro Center, I'll ask the people who work there and they would tell me, yep, every single day you'll have a line in the morning outside of people waiting because if a shipment comes in when the store opens, they can get the 5090. And obviously, most of those people are what I'll call like entrepreneurs, if you will. They want to buy it at Micro Center, then they can turn around and flip it the same day on Facebook Marketplace or eBay, whatever it is. Because even though the 5090s are like, 2700 to 3200, like kind of the pricing for most of them, some are a little higher, like that PNY. A lot of these people, you can turn around and sell it for 3,800, maybe 4,000, depending on the model. Like the Asus Astro, for a long time it was going over $4,000. So that's like probably $1,000 people can make just by flipping 5090s, or at least it was, a month or two ago, or when it seemed like kind of the demand was there. Because remember, the economy is all types of funny too with the tariffs, and there's a lot of stuff going on. But I don't think it still justifies the price of these GPUs. And it looks like the appetite for 5090s is certainly running out. Like, if these were really in that high a demand, people were buying them for $3,000 before. So what's the difference now, right? Does it matter if it's $3,000 or $3,200 when you're dropping that much money on something like a 5090? And like the models that are in stock, maybe they're not going to be the most desirable. For a while, it didn't matter which 5090 was basically in stock. You would just buy it because it wasn't available anywhere else. And if you saw like a gigabyte one drop, maybe you didn't like it, or an MSI, maybe it wasn't like the Founders Edition or like the Asus Astral or even the Asus Tough that maybe are a little more desirable. You would just buy whatever, PNY, Zotac, whatever it was. You would buy whatever model because that's the only one that had access to at the time. So, like they say, beggars can't be choosers. But now, it seems like those models are staying in stock, and a lot of them are good. I mean, the 1590 is basically all the same. Some may perform a little bit better, some may have a little bit better cooling, but there's not going to be a massive difference. Um, there are even some good models I saw in stock. I think it was like MSI and a few of the higher end models were in stock. So it's not about the GPU not being great. It's just that how much demand is there really for a $3,000 gaming GPU? Yes, you can use it for AI and machine learning, but I suspect most of those people already got their 5090s. And, I don't know if they're going to keep getting them, if maybe that cooled off. That's something that if you have like a small machine learning little farm or something, or you're a small business, it may make sense to get a 5090 because even though it's expensive, it's cheaper than the Nvidia data center GPUs, which in many ways are superior. In many ways, the Blackwell architecture on the 5090 shares a lot in common with those GPUs. And remember, the 5090 is very beefy, like 32 gigabytes of GDDR7 VRAM, and a smattering of CUDA cores and RT cores. It has a lot going for it with everything: gaming, content creation, AI. So that's why it's such an in-demand GPU. But it looks like that demand is, finally dropping. I even made sure to bounce around between a few of the micro centers on the website, and you can go check for yourself. And on average, a lot of the places, and this is around the New York City region. So I checked like in Brooklyn, the New Jersey one. So if you check in these like larger regions, they had like 20 plus in stock. And they're even allowing for not the 5090, but for the other GPUs, you can even reserve them for pickup. At first, I think the GPU that stayed in stock the most, and I made a video about this, was the 5070. I remember I went to my local micro center, and this was around when the 5070 came out, maybe within that first week. Um, and GPUs, it doesn't matter what it was, 5080 and even 5070 Ti, they would sell out immediately. Remember that thing with like the 9070 XT actually being available? That was the first GPU that was actually available in any type of reasonable numbers. So the 5070, I was very surprised to see it in stock a while after, and it's first it was the $749 models, which I think was the Asus Tough, which is like nobody in their right mind are really going to want a $750 5070. All right, it's a decent GPU, but it even loses to the 4070 Super in some cases. Like I remember seeing some Geekbench scores. 4070 Super beats it there, and then some games, the 4070 Super wins. That shouldn't happen. Like, somebody made the argument like, oh, the Super GPU is not the same comparison because that's like the pumped up one, but that's not really a valid point. Like the historical, newer model, like destroys the super of like the previous generation, even if it's a higher model. And here we're talking about literally the same model. Let me give you an example. When the 3070 came out, that pretty much beat the 3080 Super pretty handedly. And we're talking about a GPU that's like much lower in terms of the tier system, because then you still have to compare to the 3080. It beat that. You have to compare to the 2080 rather. It beat that. The 2070. It beat that by a lot. And then the 2080 Super, it also beat that. In fact, people would even draw comparisons to the 2080 Ti. That's how high the 3070 got. Now, obviously, 12 gigabytes of VRAM and the 3070 has its limitations, especially now. But that shows you that was the 30 series was really amazing. Like a 3080 for $699 MSRP, even though it came in the middle of like the whole GPU shortage thing. That was an incredible value because look at where pricing is now. It's ridiculous. I think the 3080 and 3070 were the last two like really classic great GPUs for the price. People like to look back at the 1080 Ti. That's like the king of great value, high performance GPUs. $699, and you're getting like best in class pretty much, aside from the Titan GPUs, which weren't even that expensive back in the day compared to now. Those were like in the $1,200 range, which was expensive back then, but looking at a $3,000 5090 doesn't look so bad, right? And that was only a few years ago. It's not like inflation. We're not talking about the 1930s or something, or like even the 70s. Like we're talking about a few short years ago. So inflation didn't really go up like nearly that much. It's just the Nvidia inflation went up, if that makes any sense. So 3080, 3070 were incredible. That's my point with the 5070. It barely edges out the 4070 Super. What the hell? That's why nobody bought it, all right? The 5090, the case now isn't that it's not edging out the other GPUs. It's clearly better than the 4090. Like if you have them both side by side, there's no game or no option anywhere, no type of use case where the 4090 is better. Maybe if the drivers are messed up or something, maybe the older one could be better. And maybe there's some instances of like really old games, like some of the 40 series GPUs were better. Okay, so there might be some very like little weird things you can find that I did hear about, right? But nothing that anybody's ever going to use in like the real, the real everyday use. It's not like a 20-year-old game engine or something that nobody uses. So the 5090 objectively is better than the 4090. That's my point. That's not the issue here. The issue here, but who's going to buy it for over $3,000? The people that got it already, they want the best, etc. But that's, you know, you kind of fill that cup up pretty rapidly because there's no other demand really driving the need for such an expensive GPU. A 4090, even a 4080, you can have a very high level gaming experience on a 4K monitor with, ray tracing. You can use your DLSS 3 with frame generation. Even a 5080 in many cases, if you want to do DLSS 4, 5080 is not a bad GPU. But if you're going to pay $1,800 for it, like the Asus, the Astro's up to basically, that's a big difference from $999 MSRP. If you can grab a 5080 for around $1,000, that's a good GPU. Listen, it was $1,200 for the original 4080, and the 4080 Super finally came down to $999. That was a little late, but it was good. All right, we have to give Nvidia some credit for some adjustments here, and that GPU was a good performing GPU. It wasn't much faster at all than the 4080. In fact, it's probably almost the same, but the price was less, so that was where we saw those changes. The only GPU that did have a nice difference was the 4070 Ti Super, because that had 16 gigabytes of VRAM as opposed to 12. So all of a sudden, that's a GPU that's a high-end GPU now. You can use it for 4K. The original 4070 Ti at 12 gigabytes of VRAM, that kind of sucked for the price that they were asking for it, $799. At least the 4070 Ti Super theoretically went down to $749, and it's 16 gigabytes of VRAM, even though its price really is more realistically in the real world, more like a 5080 price. It's like $1,000. And then the 5080 price is more like a 4090 price. Most of them are between like 1,300 to 1,500. So it's closer to that 4090. So there's that huge price creep. That's why MSRP prices are absolute, they're non-starter, because I guess the companies need somewhere to start at to jump their price up, but you can add, at least 50% to most of the MSRPs. I mean, hell, look at the 5090, $1,999 to that PNY being $34.99. That's a 1,500. That's the price of a 4090. That's a $1,500 like difference from what the MSRP should be. And even if it was a little pumped up model with some RGB and whatever, 2,200 at most, maybe. Because remember, even something like an Asus Strix from last generation, maybe it was at most $500 more than its, the Founders Edition, or $400 rather. I believe it was $1,999 compared to a $1,599 4090 for the Asus Strix, which was literally the top model for the RTX 4090, or thereabouts. So $400 compared to $1,500 for the same model. We're not even comparing against other tiers of GPUs. That's just really insane. And I don't think it's like sustainable, especially looking at the history. And as soon as something happens with AI a little bit, the demand that quiets down, then gamers are going to be left with extremely expensive hardware. Probably games are going up as well. Other things like CPUs and stuff are going up. I don't think it's just because of the tariffs and things like that, even though that's a major factor right now. Nvidia GPUs have been going up for a long time. This isn't just about the tariffs. They've been going up since, like, literally when the RTX 3080 came out. So, since like 2020, 2021, they've been going up at a rapid pace because of cryptocurrency and now AI. So there are other, factors. I think these chips are really high in demand, and Nvidia can just charge more for them. So I guess we're going to have to see where it pans out. But if you want a 5090, you can probably get one now, but you're going to have to shell out a whole lot of cash. So probably better to, I don't even know, 5070 Ti maybe might still be reasonable. Maybe a 5080 if you get it cheap enough might be a little reasonable. Or maybe just get the 5090, right? You only live once. At least you're going to get the highest graphics and the highest frames per second and all the path tracing goodies. And that GPU is probably going to last a long time. One good point for it, if a 4090 is still incredible, heck, even a 3090, it's getting a little long in the tooth, but that GPU is what, like 5 years old now, or somewhere like around there. It's still a very good GPU. So the 5090, I think minimum 5 years, it's going to be like really good. Obviously not the best because you're going to have a 6090 soon, or a 6080 might beat it. Or at this rate, a 6080 may not even beat whatever, a 5070, the way that NVIDIA keeps stepping up the pricing and changing the names of the GPUs. Maybe in the future, the 90 class GPU is going to be like the 60 and still the same price. I don't know. That's kind of a very dystopian future, right? All right, guys. So hope you like the GPU talk. Remember to subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the next video.